I come to the floor today, Mr. President, to tell a sad, sad story of hypocrisy. Now, it's not the first time we've told stories of hypocrisy around this Capitol building, but this one is a particularly sad story of hypocrisy because right now, the ending is ugly. In America, we like nice endings. This story of hypocrisy has a very bad ending. The name of this story is Who is Trying to Buy Your Government? There are folks out there right now trying to buy your government. The saddest part of the story is we have no idea who they are. This is embarrassing that they're blocking our efforts at making campaign finance contributions transparent. You can't really say, hey, we're going to change our mind about transparency because we got an election to win, and we got a bunch of rich people out here that want to write big checks or big corporations that want to write big checks. So what do? You try to make it about the big bad unions. Well, you know what? These rules need to apply to unions too. Unions need to be saying, they're doing ads right now, they should be saying what unions are doing them. And we should know where their money comes from. We do know where their money comes from. It comes from their members. But we ought to know who's doing it. And this law requires the same thing of unions that it requires of anyone else who's writing these big checks. Who is going to buy your government? It could be like a game show. We could have a big wheel and spin the wheel and people could guess who's buying the government. I'll tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried about government contractors. There has been big, big money in government contracting. And I've noticed from a firsthand experience that when you start shaking the trees of these government contractors, they fight back. As I've tried to clean up some of the contracting messes that have littered the financial landscape of the federal government, I have run into an amazing amount of resistance from the underground power of these government contractors. Let's just look at Blackwater. We now know that they have created dozens of fake names to do business with the government. Many of them non-competitive, many of them highly lucrative. They're hiding the identity of their company for purposes of contracting. Can you imagine what they're capable of? If they get to write checks to influence elections with nobody knowing it? I'm in big trouble, I gotta tell you the truth. Because I've gone after a lot of these big contractors, and now I know that I think my picture is probably on a lot of their dartboards. And now they don't have to worry about throwing a dart. They don't have to worry about, all they have to do is sit around and anonymously write big checks, millions of dollars, write a check for $10 million, blow out an election in a state, and nobody has to know who did it. Foreign interests? Yes. The Citizens United case created all kinds of loopholes that are actually delineated in the case. They explain the loopholes that are being created if you read the entire decision for foreign corporations. It's like after that case, we've fallen down a rabbit hole in terms of everything that we should believe in terms of our election processes. In the old days, they used to have the term the bag man. And the bag man was not exactly a positive term for people. The bag man was the guy who was in charge of carrying the money around in a bag. There was a time in this democracy that they actually did that. Big bags of cash were carried around and delivered to people's desks in every level of government in this country. And the people in this great democracy rose up and said, we want to clean this mess up. We want candidates to have to report how much money they're getting. Some states, they said, we want to limit how much they're getting. We limit how much we get. I don't know why we're not honest about this. I don't know why they don't just propose an alternative bill that we do away with any kind of limits. Frankly, it might be a better trade-off. If somebody's put a gun to my head and said, you have to choose, do you want all the money that's being spent on campaigns disclosed where it's coming from, or do you want limits? You know, I think I'd take the disclosure, because I trust the American people. If they know who's paying the bill, they can make a good judgment. They can make a good judgment whether or not they trust what that commercial says or what that mailer says or what that robocall says. Trust. Trust is the great intangible around here. You know, we really can't do our jobs with dignity and with honor if we're hypocrites and if there's not trust. Does anyone really imagine that the American people are going to trust us more when we've got open season on elections by the highest bidder? I implore my colleagues, clean up this mess with us. Don't put the last nail in the coffin of bipartisanship. This should be a bipartisan effort. One rich guy that's got a grudge against you can make unfair commercials and never be held accountable, regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I don't mind, you know, I'm not as offended by the notion that wealthy people can spend their money however they want as I am by the notion that they can buy elections with it and not be held accountable.